I was ready to divorce my wife, then I overheard her confession to her mother. The divorce papers rested on the passenger seat beside me as rain hammered against my windshield. I had rehearsed the moment 100 times. I would walk into the house, place the envelope on the dining table, and quietly end 12 years of marriage. The woman I once believed was my soulmate had become a stranger who barely looked at me anymore. We no longer laughed together. We barely shared meals. Every conversation ended in silence or misunderstanding, and every silent night convinced me that love had finally died. I thought I knew the truth. I believed my wife had stopped caring long ago. But that evening, before I could hand her those papers, I accidentally overheard a confession she made to her mother that shattered everything I thought I knew. Those few heartbreaking words changed not only my decision, but the rest of my life. Before we continue, if you believe true love deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to Love Tales for more emotional stories that touch the heart. My name is Daniel, and for years I believed that marriage was built on honesty. My wife Emily and I had once been the kind of couple everyone admired. We were best friends before we became husband and wife. We dreamed together, struggled together, and celebrated every little victory as though it were the greatest achievement in the world. We rented a tiny apartment after our wedding, filled it with secondhand furniture, and laughed about how one day we would tell our children those stories. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Every challenge seemed smaller because we faced it together. Then life slowly changed us in ways neither of us noticed. My company expanded, and my responsibilities doubled. Long hours became normal. Weekends disappeared into meetings and business trips. Emily had always dreamed of opening her own bakery, but she quietly put those dreams aside after my father became seriously ill. She spent countless hours helping my parents while I buried myself in work, convincing myself that earning more money was my way of taking care of the family. Months became years. We lived under the same roof but existed in different worlds. I convinced myself she had become cold. She rarely smiled. She looked exhausted every day, yet she never explained why. I stopped asking because I assumed I already knew the answer. I thought she simply no longer loved me. Friends noticed the distance between us before we did. They invited us out less often because we always declined. Family gatherings became awkward. My mother once gently asked whether everything was all right between us, and I forced a smile that fooled no one. Deep inside, I felt like I had already lost my marriage. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. The house was unusually quiet. Emily's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't downstairs. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard her voice coming from the small guest room where she often spoke privately with her mother on the phone. I had no intention of listening, but my footsteps stopped when I heard my own name spoken through quiet sobs. Her voice trembled with a sadness I had never heard before. She admitted to her mother that every single day she pretended to be stronger than she really was. She confessed that she knew I believed she had stopped loving me, but she couldn't find the strength to explain everything because she didn't want to become another burden in my already stressful life. She said watching me work myself into exhaustion broke her heart. She feared that if she shared her own pain, I would completely fall apart. The words that shattered me most were her quiet admission that she still loved me more than anyone in the world, even though she was terrified that I had already given up on us. I stood frozen outside the room. My hands began to shake. The envelope containing the divorce papers suddenly felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. Every assumption I had made over the past 3 years began collapsing around me. I realized I had spent so much time interpreting silence that I had never bothered to understand its cause. Emily continued speaking through tears. She admitted she had been secretly visiting doctors for months because she had been diagnosed with a serious medical condition that required expensive treatment. She hid the diagnosis because she knew how overwhelmed I already was caring for my father, paying our bills, and trying to keep my business alive during difficult times. She believed protecting me meant carrying her own suffering alone. Those words struck me harder than any physical blow ever could. The confident businessman who negotiated million-dollar contracts suddenly felt like the weakest man alive. I leaned against the hallway wall, unable to breathe properly. Every late night she spent alone, every tired smile, every forgotten meal, every silent tear I never noticed flashed through my memory like scenes from a tragic movie. She hadn't stopped loving me. She had been fighting the hardest battle of her life while trying to protect me from pain. For the first time in years, I saw my own mistakes clearly. I had mistaken sacrifice for indifference. I had mistaken exhaustion for rejection. Most painfully of all, I had mistaken love expressed through silent suffering as the absence of love altogether. I quietly slipped the divorce papers back into my briefcase before she could see me. Then I walked outside and sat alone in my car as tears streamed down my face. I cried harder than I had since I was a child, not because my marriage was ending, but because I had almost destroyed it without knowing the truth. That night I couldn't sleep. Emily eventually came downstairs pretending everything was normal. She smiled weakly and asked if I wanted dinner. Looking at her tired face, I suddenly noticed details I had ignored for months. The dark circles beneath her eyes, the way she winced slightly while reaching for a plate, the forced smile that disappeared the moment she looked away. The next morning, instead of going to work, I called my office and canceled every meeting. Then I drove back home carrying flowers, the first bouquet I had bought for her in years. She looked completely surprised when she opened the door. I didn't hand her the flowers immediately. Instead, I wrapped my arms around her and held her tighter than I ever had before. She seemed confused, almost frightened by the sudden affection. But after a few seconds, she quietly began crying into my shoulder. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Sometimes silence carries more honesty than words ever can. When we finally sat together, we spent hours telling each other everything we had been hiding. I confessed that I had prepared divorce papers because I believed she no longer loved me. Emily broke down completely after hearing that. She admitted she had sensed my emotional distance, but blamed herself for causing it. Every misunderstanding had grown because both of us believed we were protecting the other. By the end of that day, our marriage wasn't magically perfect, but it was finally honest. And honesty gave us something far more valuable than perfection. It gave us hope.